Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glendavid Books. The Lakshadweep administrator proposes a series of sweeping changes in rules and regulations applicable in the islands, and it's not only created a storm of controversy but great consternation and anguish for the islanders themselves. So today we examine the proposed changes and ask, is the government about to make an avoidable but unforgivable mistake? My guest is a former administrator from Lakshadweep as well as a former chief secretary in Delhi, Omesh Saigal. Mr. Saigal, late last month you wrote a letter to the Home Minister criticizing and opposing the proposed changes. I'll come to your letter later. Let's first focus on the main changes the administrator intends. Now, to begin with, he wants to amend the Lakshadweep Animal Preservation Regulations, banning the slaughter of cows, calves, bulls and buffaloes, as well as the selling, keeping, storing, transporting and buying of beef and beef products. Tell me, what would this mean for a population that is 96% Muslim and enjoy eating beef?
Well, as far as the slaughter is concerned, I don't think it is a bad idea, because these are very fragile islands and the water table is just a few feet below the ground. So animals being slaughtered there will affect the water supply. So I don't know why it was not thought of earlier, why it has been thought of now. But there is no particular reason why it should not have been thought of earlier. But if it has not been thought of earlier and it has been thought of now, I would personally not implement it without consultation or extensive consultation with the people there.
What about a ban on the buying, transporting and selling of beef and beef products?
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous, because even in nearby Kerala, where the non-Muslims also take beef, so, and that is not banned in India also, in Delhi also, in the 5-star hotels you can get beef. So when it is not banned anywhere else, why pick up on Lakshadweep? Especially because this may be their main diet.
So your position is, any ban on the buying, selling and storing of beef is ridiculous, it's discriminatory, but you think it might be a good idea to put a ban on slaughter because the water table is very close to the surface and slaughtering, if done improperly, could impurify the water table.
Yeah.
But even a ban on slaughter, you say, should happen after consulting the people, not without.
Extensive consultation with the people. Especially, there is no legislative assembly there, but there are elected panchayats. And we will come to that later. The Supreme Court itself has held, the General Servant of India has held, that all development activities should be carried out in consultation with these elected panchayats.
And so, therefore, any ban on slaughter should happen in consultation with elected panchayats. Now, let's come back for a moment on the ban that the administrator wants to impose on the buying, selling and storing of beef and beef products. The BJP is in power in Goa, it's in power in the northeast. There, beef is eaten, bulls are slaughtered, and the party is very sensitive to the food habits of the local people. Why do you think the BJP is incapable of being similarly understanding of the people of Lakshadweep?
I don't think BJP has anything to do with this. There is no party there. In fact, there are just individuals who get elected. And the BJP is in power in the center, no doubt, and they have appointed the administrator. That's all. I doubt if the BJP or the central leadership or the ministers have been consulted before such a ban was imposed.
You mean to say that this is being done by the administrator, Mr. Patel, of his own volition?
That's what I think, because I have been there. I have never found any interference on these grounds, because beef was allowed even then. There was a time when there was a BJP in the central government, but I don't think there was any interference on that.
So this is a bee in the bonnet of the administrator. It is not something he's doing at the behest of or on the instructions of the BJP government in Delhi.
Well, I'm not privy to any private information.
But that's your feeling?
That's what I feel, yeah, strongly.
Now, in fact, just yesterday, that is to say Tuesday, the Kerala High Court struck down one of the changes that the administrator wants to bring. Forgive me, it didn't strike it down, it stayed it. And the one that it stayed is his decision that meat and chicken will not be served at midday meals. Tell me, why shouldn't children in Lakshadweep have meat and chicken at midday meals? Why not does the administrator object to that?
He has no business to be objecting to that. Midday meals are given according to a particular financial pattern. And anywhere in the country, there is no bar on what you serve there, provided you are within the parameters laid down by the government.
So this is once again the administrator's personal prejudice.
It has to be, because you see, fish is served, because fish is by and large free. It's very, very cheap on the island. So fish was preferred at all given times. But the point is, children want to change. And children, when they come to school, they want to change diet. So you could give eggs, you could give chicken, and you could give meat.
But the most important thing you're saying is, as long as it's within the budget, the administrator has no right to decide what is actually served and no right to stop meat and chicken.
Certainly not. Certainly not. It can only be done by law. It can only be done by law. It cannot be done by executive fiats.
Then let me put this to you. You know and I know that in Goa beef is served. It's served in several northeastern states. The only possible reason the administrator is objecting to beef being eaten in Lakshadweep or meat and chicken served to children in midday meals is not just that he's prejudiced, but I'm going to ask you bluntly, is it that he has an anti-Muslim prejudice? Is that what you suspect?
I don't suspect anything of the sort. Anti-Muslim prejudice in India is there among certain people. There is no doubting that. But by and large, we are a secular country. Our thinking is secular and mostly educated.
But what about the individual who is the administrator? Is he behaving secularly?
Well, yes and no. No. I should say no. This is not a secular.
So do you suspect that there is prejudice in his mind when he bars the sale of beef or the eating of meat and chicken by children?
This was a preconceived notion.
A preconceived notion?
Yeah, it has to be.
That sounds like a euphemism for prejudice.
Yes, it is as a preconceived notion. I have gone there. I have gone from Gujarat. There is this. Bihar,
you're being polite, but you are suggesting this is prejudice in his mind.
Well, it is, yes.
It is?
Yes.
You agree?
Yes.
Okay. Let's come to a second proposed change. He wants to permit the consumption of alcohol in what are called inhabited islands. At the moment, it's prohibited. Now, the BJP supports and promotes prohibition in Gujarat and in Bihar. Why do they want to amend or dilute it in Lakshadweep?
Not only BJP. It was during Mrs. Gandhi's time when this agreement was signed, a 21-point program was signed with Vinoba Bhave, the restriction on liquor has come. And in all states there is a restriction on liquor. In Lakshadweep, except in Bangaram Island, where tourism was opened up, there was no way that you could take liquor there. And in the inhabited islands, where most of the people don't drink liquor, it's only the outside officials who do. I mean, there's no harm. I mean, I was there 3 years.
No harm in what?
In being restrained, in not taking liquor. What is there?
No harm in continuing with prohibition in the inhabited islands.
Precisely.
So, in other words, once again, the administrator, in wanting liquor drunk in those islands, is doing something that goes against the wishes of the people.
Absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous to introduce liquor in any part of India where people don't want it. Is absolutely against our secular, against our cultural values. Absolutely against.
So once again, this is prejudice.
It is absolutely wrong. It is basically, he has a preconceived notion that you have to make it Maldives. You have to make it Maldives means foreigners. Foreigners means liquor.
Third, the administrator wants to introduce a preventive detention law called the Prevention of Antisocial Activities Act. Sometimes colloquially it's called the Gunda Act. And this would allow people to be detained for a whole year without trial for acting, and I'm quoting, in any manner prejudicial to the maintenance of public order. That's very, very wide and very, very vague. Now, the National Crime Records Bureau says Lakshadweep has the lowest crime rate in the country. So does Lakshadweep need this almost draconian law?
That's one place where Ram Rajya exists. I don't think anybody puts a lock outside his house. I have never put a lock. Of course, I had a police guard. But no one puts a lock outside his house. People are so safe. Women move around freely in the island. They don't wear burqas or parda or anything of the sort. And people are safe. And if my knowledge is right, no Thana had registered a case at least in the last 1 century. Of course, police stations have been set up because that's what the law requires.
That's a very important point you've made. No thana, no police station has registered a criminal case for the last century.
Maybe more than a century. The only case I read of was some murder case long back that also was basically on a very minor issue like theft of sheep or something like that.
So quite clearly, Lakshadweep does not need a draconian preventive detention law.
Absolutely you don't need, because there is another way of keeping if so-called antisocial people out.
Which is?
Don't give them a license for the ship, because there's no way to come in. There's a permit system there, which was introduced during the
So
British
this
rule.
law is completely unnecessary.
Absolutely unnecessary from any point of view.
Fourthly, the administrator wants to introduce new regulations which would bar people who have more than 2 children from contesting panchayat elections. Now, as you mentioned yourself in one of your earlier answers, there is no legislative assembly in Lakshadweep at all. The only existing democratic body are the panchayats. But if you then put a bar in terms of who can stand and who can't, is it fair to further restrict the democratic mandate in the islands?
If you want to do that, let there be a demand from the people, because it is overcrowded, it is densely populated. So if people want to have population control, let them want it. It cannot be imposed from the top. We have tried it before, it has failed. So whatever the intention behind this move, it is bound to fail.
In other words, if you are going to put a bar on the sort of people who can qualify for standing for panchayat elections, it can only be done if the people themselves request it or if they are extensively consulted and agree.
Precisely, precisely. One of their most popular members of parliament, Mr. P.M. Said, had more than 2 children. He had, I think, 5 or 6 children. So you will.
And if I'm right, he served for over 20 years as an MP.
25 years, he was also a deputy speaker in the Lok Sabha. Very popular person.
So once again, an administrator in Lakshadweep must not impose these sort of regulations. He must consult. He must also see whether people are willing to accept it.
Precisely.
Finally, the administrator wants to introduce a new Lakshadweep Development Authority regulation which would make it easier to acquire land allegedly for development purposes. Now at this point, I'm going to introduce the letter you've written to the Home Minister, because in your letter sent at the end of May, you're sharply critical about amendments to the Lakshadweep Development Authority regulation. You say, and I'm quoting you, some of the provisions of the draft are laughable. You add, far from being designed for Lakshadweep, these provisions are picked up from a city like Delhi. Can you explain a bit more what you mean when you say the draft is laughable?
Delhi, they have a master plan. Okay, master plan defines the areas where you can have residences, we can have commercial areas, you can have open areas, recreational areas. Now that master plan is what you are trying to drop there. Now what happens is that there is not a single square there. Of course, the island, as you know, is a boat-shaped island, and on the southwest, it is much wider than it is on the northeast. So it goes something like this. And the northeast is not populated. It's very thinly populated or not populated at all. But the southeast area is very thickly populated. What will your regulations do? So how will you acquire Abadi land? You cannot acquire land under Indian law in any area where people are living. You cannot. You can take it from them by negotiations, but you cannot acquire. But in Lakshadweep, there is a second problem. You see, the Supreme Court some time back had appointed a Ravindran committee. I have mentioned it there. By Justice Ravindran was also a judge of the Supreme Court. And he gave a report which the Government of India, which the Supreme Court accepted, which the Government of India accepted, and they have issued a notification. They have very clearly said in the notification that no development is to take place without consultation, here it would mean approval, of the elected bodies. Elected panchayat, gram panchayats.
And the new Development Authority regulations don't envisage consultation at all.
At all. So this will be ridiculous.
So you're saying there are 2 things wrong with this Development Authority regulation. One, it attempts to forcibly acquire land that people are living on, and that is impermissible. And secondly, there's need for consultation as the Supreme Court has laid down, but this regulation doesn't envisage consultation. It's therefore wrong on both counts.
It is wrong on both counts. So why I believe how they are interpreting, they say when the development takes place, we will consult them. The point is you have acquired land, and tomorrow the elected body says no. What will you do with the acquired land? So you have thrown the person out, and where will you throw him out?
In other words, the consultation should happen before the acquiring, not after the acquiring.
Precisely. It should have been done now. You have the so-called IIMPs. IIMP itself, I have gone into detail, needs extensive change modifications. But anyway, the IIMP is the Island Integrated Management Plan. Those also have not been got approved. So they should first get the IIMPs approved by the elected bodies, and then according to that approval, you can have acquisition of land if you so like.
But even then, the acquisition of land has to be after approval.
Precisely.
So in other words, these changes to do with the Lakshadweep Development Authority regulation are dictatorial. They are being imposed in an undemocratic fashion on a people without consultation and against their will.
It has been imposed by a person who doesn't know, who has not seen the island, who has not been there. He has come with a preconceived notion. He has taken the authority like the Delhi Development Authority. He says, I have a Lakshadweep Development Authority. So he's gone with baggage, and that baggage he has presented to a people who don't even know what is in the baggage.
Again, you are saying two things. A, the administrator is ignorant of the actual conditions in Lakshadweep because he's hardly been there. And secondly, he has preconceived notions. He's imposing a Delhi model on Lakshadweep when it doesn't apply.
And I'm sorry, I don't want to be critical of anybody I have not met, but that's true.
Now, speaking presumably on behalf of the administrator, the collector, a gentleman called S. Askar Ali, has given the following explanation. He says, and I'm quoting him, we want to develop Lakshadweep like the Maldives, if not better. Once again, in your letter to the Home Minister, you roundly criticize this. You say, Lakshadweep has no tourism potential beyond what it has already developed. Explain this to me. Why does Lakshadweep, so beautifully located, not have a tourism potential? After all, people like Rajiv Gandhi used to want to holiday there, and everyone thought this could be India's prime tourist destination. You're saying exactly the opposite. So can you explain that to me?
I am not saying exactly the opposite. Rajiv Gandhi and his family loved to go to Bangaram. Bangaram is an uninhabited island, and it has been developed long back with the consent, approval of the local people. And they have got employment there, and they were very happy. You have no other uninhabited islands of same type. You have Suheli, which they are now recommending. There is no fresh water there. So where you will take water from outside. If you will put up a desalination plant, from where will the power come? So all that has not been thought of. Even in the IIMP, which has been drawn up, excuse me for saying, by a Supreme Court appointed committee, after a Supreme Court appointed committee, have not gone into any details. They have carried the baggage from the mainland, norms from the mainland, and they say wherever there is 30 square kilometers of land available, we can put one bed. I mean, it's so ridiculous. Land is available in the northern side, where there is no water. So from where will you take the water?
So the problem is that where land is available, there's no water, and to be able to provide desalination of water, you need power plants, but the power plant doesn't exist, and you can't put it up either because these are uninhabited islands. This is why you conclude, and I'm quoting you again, Lakshadweep has no tourism potential beyond what it has already developed. In other words, it cannot become the Maldives.
What has been developed is so-called cruise tourism. Cruise tourism is you stay the night in the ship, you spend the day in the islands. Now when you spend the day in the islands, you get food there, you buy local handicrafts, you spend money there, so it is of benefit to the local islanders. At night you go back, so you are no charge. You see, you have this.
But you're suggesting to me that cruise tourism is the only tourism possible. You can't set up hotels and resorts on the islands themselves.
Except in Bangaram, which is already done.
Only Bangaram.
Bangaram, they have said in Minicoy also, maybe parts of Minicoy, there also I personally feel you should not set up any beds.
Then let me at this point ask you, if Lakshadweep has no tourism potential beyond what is developed, and what is developed is minimal, and as you suggest, is limited to Bangaram, then how does Lakshadweep develop?
Well, you see, let me first tell you, in Maldives there are 900 uninhabited islands, which they have given to foreign countries, and they have come and invested there. Now, how does Lakshadweep develop? Now, you see, basically Lakshadweep is a very interesting land. It is land there is a lagoon which is 4,000 square kilometers. Land is only 30 square kilometers. You have the reef, which has a total length of about 800 miles, 800 kilometers. Then you have the sandbanks. Sandbanks are something like, which is 200 feet, 200 meters deep. So again, you have azure water there. You were excellent for fishing and for other things, and then you have the open ocean. So what I have suggested is a sort of concept of blue economy has developed all over the world. Ever since people have realized that ocean resources are not being used and they can be used. Government of India has also recently sanctioned 4,000 crores for surveying.
Okay, can I interrupt? You're suggesting that the development that is possible in Lakshadweep would be based upon the ocean resources surrounding the islands rather than on the land of the islands.
Precisely, rather than the land of the islands alone. That there has to be an integrated development. I will not call it a blue economy. I would like to call it an azure economy.
So it's a sea development policy that you need rather than a land development.
Precisely.
Do you think the present administrator is thinking along these lines? Is he even aware of the reason why what you're suggesting is perhaps a better option?
It's not just the administrator not thinking about it. I don't think the Government of India is also thinking about it. Mainlanders are terribly land-based. They only think of development on basis of land, this DDA business or BDA business. They do not feel that anything can be done in the ocean.
Now, but then, Mr. Saigal, you're saying something that is very disillusioning and disturbing. You're saying governments, and I assume it's not just the BJP government of today, but it's Indian governments historically,
Precisely.
have not thought properly about the sort of development that is possible in Lakshadweep. They keep wanting to impose models that are land-based that will be inappropriate in islands, and therefore this means no one really has given Lakshadweep the attention it deserves.
Except on one point.
Which is?
Which is they have now laying a submarine cable to bring the IT there. IT is something which has caused a mini revolution in our country, provided jobs, well-paying jobs to millions of our young people.
So you're suggesting that Lakshadweep could become the back office for the rest of the world?
For the rest of the country at least, if not for the rest of the world.
That sounds a bit far-fetched, but let's leave that aside. I think taking a sea cable to Lakshadweep to provide better IT is essential for the islanders. Whether Lakshadweep actually becomes the back office of the world is another matter. But what you do agree with is that historically, governments in India have not really given Lakshadweep the attention it deserves. They haven't thought properly about what is possible and feasible. They keep wanting to impose land-based models of development that really don't apply.
Except in one area, when the first president of India, Rajendra Prasad, landed there and he found all Muslims being totally nationalist, he came back and told Nehru. So Nehru then amended the constitution and made them all scheduled tribes. By becoming scheduled tribes, they get better jobs now.
But that would have happened over 60 years ago.
After that,
if the one example that you can find of how governments have thought properly about Lakshadweep happened 60 years ago, that proves my point.
1955.
So for 55 years or 60 years, we haven't really given Lakshadweep the attention it deserves.
No.
We're coming to the end of this interview. I want to go back to the letter you sent the Home Minister. I think this is your conclusion. You say these draft regulations that the administrator is thinking of imposing should not be allowed to remain even for a moment at the draft stage. The Home Ministry should immediately make announcements that these draft regulations are withdrawn. This should be done before more damage is done. In other words, you're saying to the Home Minister, at the moment this is a problem, you can nip it in the bud. But if you don't, this problem will become a crisis.
It's obvious. It's obvious. Everybody there is up in arms against these regulations. The central government has not approved them. It is just a draft. And it cannot approve them because of a Supreme Court decision and the Department of Environment already there. So there is no harm. I'm told.
But if the central government cannot approve them because there's a Supreme Court decision, then they should say so.
Precisely.
I mean, by allowing the consternation and anguish in Lakshadweep to continue, A, they're making a problem worse, and B, they're showing to the people of Lakshadweep, we don't really care what you think.
Precisely. They should say so. And they should say so in strong words. Just telling the MP and then the MP making a statement is not enough.
But the truth of the matter is that, in fact, the government in Delhi, leave aside the Home Minister, hasn't said anything. They're completely quiet.
I believe he's not. because the member of parliament who met him has made a statement that he has told him that without extensive consultation.
But that statement was made by the member of parliament,
the
not by the
member,
home
not by the
minister. The
Home
home
Minister.
ministers had nothing to say at all.
No.
Let me come to something that Omesh Saigal, the former Lakshadweep MP, said. He said till 2014, the administrators were IAS officers, as you were when you were administrator. Since 2014, apparently they have been political appointees. Is that one reason why these insensitive and bizarre changes in rules and regulations are being imposed upon people?
Well, I will not comment on this, but what I will say is that the junior officer, those who were being posted there, were generally joint secretary and above level, do not take policy decisions on their own. And our whole training is to consult the proper people before you take any such decision.
This is why IAS officers make better administrators.
They make better administrators.
They consult.
They consult not only them, they also consult the local people.
A political appointee thinks he can do what he wants because he has the support of the government. Therefore, he doesn't consult anyone.
He thinks he has. He thinks he has. Maybe he has. I don't know.
So, Omesh Saigal is making quite an apt point. Once political appointees became administrators, they began doing what they think they wanted, regardless of whether the people want it or not, and they began imposing insensitive regulations.
Well, at least the present one is.
My last question. It's almost exactly a month since you wrote that letter, both criticizing and opposing the proposed changes to the Home Minister. You also sent copies to the Cabinet Secretary and to the Home Secretary. Have you had any reply from any of them?
It's unfortunate. I was expecting that some Deputy Secretary level person would ring me up and would say, sir, can you elaborate on the points that you have made? No one has bothered, and which is not good, which hurts. But I suppose that is the way governments function, because they can't. There are so many bureaucrats writing letters. You have sometimes 80 people writing.
Can I ask you this? I'm interrupting. If no one has rung you, even at the Deputy Secretary level, does this mean that A, you've had no reply from any of the three I mentioned, and B, you haven't even had an acknowledgement that your letter was received?
No.
Isn't this discourtesy, Mr. Saigal?
Well, I will not say it is discourtesy, because it is not my job to write a letter. I have gone out of the way. I am in touch with people there. People were very upset. They were writing to me, so I thought it was my duty to bring it to the Home Minister's notice. I would normally have written only to the Home Secretary, but since this guy is a political appointee, I thought I'll write to the Home Minister.
Let me ask you this. You're reluctant to call it a discourtesy. Are you disappointed that you've had no reply? You haven't even had an acknowledgement of your letter. Are you disappointed?
I'm unhappy.
Unhappy. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Saigal. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.